to our Happiness at Work, Is It Overrated virtual boardroom that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Helen Bailey from Strategi Solutions. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Helen, who will introduce herself shortly. Helen is going to explore happiness at work and the factors which drive great productivity in the workplace. If you've got any questions or comments during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we will cover them as we go along. I'm now going to hand you over to Helen, who will introduce herself and start the session. Thank you.
Hey, so just let me do the relevant sharing bit because that would be really helpful. There you go. All in. Hi, everybody. So I'm Helen Bailey. I am the Head of Learning Development at Strategi Solutions. And I sometimes think that this title has made me sound a bit grumpy. Happiness at work, is it overrated? Well, we'll see. So what essentially drove me to this topic was I've been thinking very much about emotion at work and how we deal with it. And this is how I came to this. So that's what we're really going to talk about today. But before we get into that, just a little bit about Strategi, what we do, who we are. So we very much describe ourselves, and this is us. You'll notice that I'm not on the picture because I took the picture, and you get me in person. So we describe ourselves as helpers and doers, thinkers, designers, and analysts. And essentially, we are a business consultancy, and we're made up of three clear strands: creative, people, and marketing. We sometimes describe ourselves as like the Avengers, and I'm still deciding what Avenger I would like to be when I grow up. If you've got a suggestion, you can pop it in the chat. I'm not sure I'll necessarily take it up, but please feel free to kind of go down that route. And as I said, we've got these three clear strands about what we do. And the first one is people. So when we talk about people, we talk about health and safety, we talk about recruitment, we talk about culture change, which is essentially is three things brought together. We do HR consultancy. And did I mention that we do amazing L&D? I only get to say that when I'm just talking about the people bit. And then the marketing piece. We do all kinds of marketing. So we do digital, we do traditional, we'll build social media campaigns for you. We do public relations and we do awards and events, and we'll come back to that a bit later. And then from the creative side, we build websites, we create brands, we'll build our stripes behind me, that's all done by our design team. It's the most fabulous thing I've ever discovered as an L&D person, having somebody who can create that for me. And then here's some of the companies we've worked with, and here's some of the awards that we've won. Okay. And that's enough about us. So let's get into happiness at work. Is it overrated? So some of the things I wanted to talk about today is the first thing is really to think about what is happiness. And that's a big question, I think, in itself. And I suspect that what happiness means to me is very different to what it means to a lot of people. So I'm going to ask you that question in a second. And then to really think about what drives engagement at work. So how do we know that people are engaged at work? And then I have a question really, which is about, is happiness the acceptable face of emotion at work? Is that the one we feel most comfortable with? And that's going to kind of lead us into how to be authentically you at work. And do you need to be authentically you at work all the time? You know, if the authentic me is dancing on tables and screaming and shouting, I'm not sure that's what Strategi we're really going for when they employed me. And then just to kind of touch on what is the impact of a constant pursuit of happiness. So that's really how we're going to play out. So just to kind of kick us off, I was kind of interested in what happiness means to you. So if you can go on to mentee.com and use the code 47844875 and just pop your responses in. So you've got 3-word options to pop in. So if I just give you a moment, just to kind of have a think, what does happiness mean to you? This is the bit where I sip my tea and wait patiently. Ooh, content, non-anxious, calm. Love those words. Security. Okay, love that as well. No big stresses or worry. Yeah, able to switch off. Yes, that's something I'm going for. If I can get to the being able to switch off, I'm going to be very happy with that. Not waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning thinking, oh, we could do that. It'd be amazing. Let's give you another minute or so. Reassurance, peace, trained, supported. And in the chat, we've got stress-free and security, being authentic. Going to keep moving now. Yeah. Teamwork, family, being self-driven. Okay, so what that tells us already, that feels like quite a few people have inputted there, and it'll keep going, it is that happiness means different things to different people. And actually, there is many definitions of happiness as they are, let's say football teams. Let's go for that. That seems to be a good rule of thumb for today. So let's have a look at some definitions, and thank you very much for doing that for me. So here's a few things to think about. So Daniel Kahneman talks about the difference between being happy in your life and being happy about your life. So just let me kind of express that a little bit further and kind of describe what I mean. So being happy in your life is really about experiencing moments of happiness. Okay, so we've mentioned football already, so I'm going to have to go for it now. So last night I experienced a moment of happiness because Man United beat Crystal Palace 3-0. Woohoo! That's probably disenchanted half the audience right there. But that was a moment of happiness. Yeah. Being happy about your life is really thinking about the whole piece. Yeah. That incident last night was essentially me sat on my sofa shouting at the telly. And that was a moment of happiness. Happy about your life is the bigger piece. So when I look at my life as a whole, when I look at my life living in Newcastle-under-Lyme, which is where I live, working at Strategi, what else do I do outside of here? Going to visit National Trust properties, that kind of thing. Am I happy with all of that? So there is a very distinct difference. And Daniel Kahneman talks about, you really need to think about what is it you are after. Are you after these various moments, or do you want to be content, which is one of the words that you used, with all of it? So that's our starter for 10. If you kind of take that further, there is something called the World Happiness Report. I love the idea of the World Happiness Report, which kind of looks at countries and kind of thinks about, okay, so what is it that makes a country happy? And these are their measures. So they talk about gross domestic product per capita, which is really determining how prosperous a country is. They talk about social support. They talk about healthy life expectancy, the freedom to make life choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption, which is absolutely my favorite thing that they look at. So my question here for you is, and if you want to pop your answers in the chat, which country do you think is number one in the World Happiness Report? Oh, Sweden, Denmark. Oh, Bhutan, Finland, Switzerland, Australia. So if you put Finland, you're right. They are the happiest. There's quite a big mix, though, isn't there, of things. So my next question is, where do you think the UK? So you've got 1 to 300 to go at. Where do you think the UK ranks? I'm not giving you any indicators where it might be. Oh, there's some pretty 200s going on in the chat. Oh, that's a big range there, isn't it? I'm just going to check. I'm just going back in the chat because I think somebody was quite close. I think the prize for being quite close goes to Theodore and Selma, because the answer is 20th. The UK sits 20th in the World Happiness Report. So So Katie, I'm happy to give out the praise and recognition as is required, because today, obviously, I'm all about the happiness. Yeah, it does sit at 20th. This was really interesting. So yesterday, actually, I was just delivering a session on cultural awareness, and there is a really interesting thing you can go and have a look at, and it's called Hofstede's Country Comparison Report, and it kind of talks about, you can put in any country and it gives you some indicators. And one of the things it talked about was that the UK are not great as a whole at restraining their impulses. And I don't know how that feeds into the happiness report, but it probably does explain my liking for crisps and where that's probably led me. Yeah. So one more thing to look at when we're talking about definitions. Somebody I would definitely recommend you go and check out, and in the references, so Joe's got a copy of the slides, and I know she's going to be happy to send those out afterwards. You're going to come across a reference to somebody called Laurie Santos. Laurie Santos runs a course at the university, Yale University, which is all about happiness. It's called The Science of Wellbeing. I love that, Joanne. Not happy about having an extra. Nobody's happy about an extra meeting. Yeah. You can do this course for free, actually. Laurie Santos' course on Coursera, you can do it for free. So she talks about you need the variable to experience happiness, because if you are happy all the time, that's not happiness, that's just the norm. So, and I'm going to quote Robbie Williams, because I live near Stoke and everybody knows Robbie Williams in Stoke. You've got to get highs before you taste the lows. There you go. Thank you very much. It's on Coursera, Lisa, and I've put it in the references at the back, so you'll be able to find it. Laurie Santos also talks about that happiness changes at various stages of our lives. And, so what if I talk about myself personally, what I perhaps wanted at 20 and what I want just a couple of years later, well, many years later, is probably very different. And, you can take my job title as a really good example of that. When I was 20, being head of L&D probably was everything I aspired to. But actually now, the job title doesn't really matter to me as much anymore. And that's when I finally got it. And she also says that happiness is like a leaky tire. It's not a destination. You don't get to a point and you go, I'm happy, lovely, tick in the box, I'm done. You need boosting as you're going along. So, quite often when you read some of the work on happiness, you kind of see that it's about those momentary bits of happiness. So yeah, I'm doing that weird thing there. But it's about momentary happiness. There's not one peak of happiness, the ultimate moment. There should be, and one of the things we'll talk about later is the glimmer and experiencing those little glimmers. So if we think about happiness at work, generally when we think about happiness at work, we're thinking about engagement. And we're thinking about how engaged are people, and that relates to a lot of the work we do here at Strategi in terms of culture change. So just to get us started on that, in the chat, what engages at work, do you think? What are some of the things that you think engages? Sense of belonging, yeah. Project work, inclusion, the money. It's always about the money. Feeling listened to. I think I've just seen trust. Free food. Free food. Where's that? I'm going there. Recognition, respect, purpose, people, work-life balance. I think one of the after effects, I think, of the pandemic is there has been a change in that expectation as well. I think about what people wanted from their work. We did some research last year, and I think there was something like a 674% increase of people looking for hybrid work or working from home. Yeah, Joe's nodding, so I must have got that right. Yeah. The free food. Yeah, everybody is going to work for the free food. There we go. Challenging work. Yeah. Direct manager. Yeah, I think your manager is really important. In my leadership development capacity, I talk about that relationship with your management. It's almost the most important relationship you have at work. Most simply, flexibility, praise. Okay, so I think you've covered nearly everything that the CIPD managed to cover in their survey. So they talked about what engages. They talked about goals, so having very clear goals. They talked about feedback and regular feedback. So I think we've covered praise in the chat, but really thinking about, catching people doing things right. And that's not my expression, that's an expression that comes from Ken Blanchard in his book, Well Done. regular recognition, whatever that looks like. I used to work in a distribution center, and we used to have a wheel of fortune in the middle of the warehouse. And one of the things we used to give away is a George Foreman grill. I think everybody in that place had a George Foreman. I had two because my husband worked there as well. So I think another one of the prizes was day out with a driver. People were mixed about that one. The money, so I think that was mentioned. So the monetary rewards. And then we've got an interesting one, which is about perceived supervisory support. And I think that's kind of interesting because it kind of suggests that it doesn't matter what it is, it's how it feels, if you get my drift. So it's that perception of it. Then you've got empowerment and autonomy. Then we've got psychological safety, which we'll come back to. So that's the work of Amy Edmondson. Do I feel safe to be able to say that I don't agree and that I can challenge? Do I feel safe to be myself? And then we've got this perceived fairness and justice. So again, that word perceived, it doesn't matter whether it is or not. It's how do I perceive that? And in the same distribution center that used to have the Wheel of Fortune, I used to get measured on a question, which was, do you think our promotion process is fair and transparent? And people would answer yes if they got the job, and they answer no if they didn't get the job. Yeah, we had a lot of discussions about that. Right. So these are the kind of things that engages, but how do you measure engagement? So again, if you want to pop some stuff in the chat about what do you do to see how engaged your people are? What are some of the things that you've got in place? Pulse surveys. I like pulse surveys because they're kind of regular. I think sometimes employee surveys, employee opinion surveys, lots of surveys, NPS scores, yeah, way days. Or Be Heard survey. That's a really nice name for it, Caroline. Yeah, KPIs, performance reviews. Yeah, all these things. There's lots of things that you can do. Yeah, talking to your employees as a human being, Diane. Yay. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Jane. Take care. Actually just having a discussion, that is really valuable information. If you wanted to get started on a survey, one of the things you could look at is the Gallup Q12 questions. And they pretty much cover everything that comes out in the CIPD survey. So I know what's expected. I have materials and equipment. My supervisor seems to care about me as a person. And then I'm going to just really here settle on question 10. I have a best friend at work. So I've run various sessions around this topic, and I have a best friend at work seemingly is a little bit controversial. Why do you think that question is asked? What are they really getting at when they're asking, have you got a best friend at work?
We used to use this one, Helen, when I was at B&Q quite a few years ago. And I think you just touched on a really good point, because a lot of the issues can be about your interpretation. So you would get scored quite negatively on, for example, I have a best friend at work, and then when you went back to someone and say, why potentially have you scored that low, and they're like, well, I haven't got a best friend at work, and you'll say, well, have you got someone that you can confide in, someone you can talk to? Oh, well, yeah. And so if the interpretation of the questions isn't correct, then it can cause misleading results.
Absolutely. And that's why sometimes this one goes awry. And it's also sometimes the interpretation of best friend. Yeah, what does best friend? I mean, I might have a friend at work, but they're not my best friend. But absolutely, as Claire and Andrea are talking about in the chat, it's about, do I have a sense of belonging, and do I have someone I can trust in the organization? Somebody I can be authentically myself with in the organization. And that's important, particularly when we're talking about happiness. Because it could be that you are not happy all the time, and you just need someone where you can kind of blow off a bit of steam, or a safe space. And that's really what that question is all about. Do you get to do that with somebody? Do you have that safe space? I don't know what I'd say if I didn't say best friend, but because if you say safe space, that gets into a whole kind of other thing as well. But yeah, but I have a best friend at work. But those are good questions to kind of get you started and just getting you to think about it. So we're talking about having a safe space, somebody I don't have to be perhaps on top of the world all the time with. So I have a question for you, and this is another Menti question. And my question here is, do you think happiness is the acceptable face of emotion at work? Okay. And what I mean by that is, and I didn't want to use the happiness word like 3 million times, is what I'm really asking here Is happy what we are happy with at work, and do we struggle with other types of emotions like sadness, anger? So your options is yes, no, maybe, and a couple of people have got straight into that and gone straight in with yes. So your code is 47844875, maybe. Yes, in capital letters, Theodore. Thank you so much. An enthusiastic yes in the chat. Just give you another minute or so. See, I put Menti in so I can drink my tea while we're doing this. Okay, so we're a little bit. Well, we've got no nose. Oh, there we go. just to prove me wrong. There we go. Just get one. So we've got 6 yeses, 1 no. Oh, so yeah, the yes and the maybe. I think it is a little bit up for debate. We've got another couple of yeses. So we've got Theodore and we've got Anne in the chat also saying yes. So I think this is an interesting thought that I spend a lot of time talking about having difficult conversations. I could probably walk into any organization tomorrow and I could say, well, let's do a course on handling difficult conversations. People go, yes, Helen, that's exactly what we need. And I think the thing is, we struggle with those conversations which are not in that kind of positive light. So, you know, think of all the conversations we have at work, you know, and you know, performance management, let's take menopause, let's talk neurodiversity, all those conversations. We find those a little bit more challenging. And I wonder if some of that is around the emotion that sits with that. And that's what makes it difficult. So the maybes have won out. Yeah, you're not going to move again. Lovely. So let's take that a bit further. This is Mark Brackett. He describes himself as an emotion scientist, which is a great job title, and probably I need to go and see somebody about getting that. But he talks about what is missing from our lives is a comfort of feeling, and identifies that often we don't know how to respond when someone says, I am feeling. And if we took something like, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling depressed, I am feeling angry, we don't often know. Selma, I absolutely agree with you, actually, as it happens. It's yes, if happiness means accepting all emotions. Yeah, I think sometimes we just go for the big smiley face, happy. Yeah. But yeah, what Mark is saying is that we struggle with that idea that, you know, that somebody says, I'm feeling angry. And instead of saying great or fine, that's more difficult. That's a more difficult conversation. And Susan David, in her book, The Gift and Power of Emotional Courage, talks about that a third of us judge ourselves for having what are perceived, and I want to use that word now, perceived as bad emotions. So sadness, anger, grief. Yeah. And maybe that what we need to do, and what Mark Brackett suggests, is that we need to give people permission to feel those other emotions. Because what happens if we mask our emotions? And maybe this is a question for the chat. What happens if people start masking their emotions at work? What's the outcome of that? Stress, Pearly? Yeah. Absence? Yeah. There's a lot of stress. It's quite draining if people start to mask because, you know, as Lisa's referring to there, less productivity. Yeah, I think it is, Claire, you know, that people not being comfortable hearing things that are not what they expect. Yeah, can be quite toxic, Rachel, absolutely. And when you are masking emotions, what you're doing is you're using up a lot of emotional energy and you're storing it right here. And when you are storing it, what you're essentially doing is building it up for a later date. And when you build it up for a later date, it's probably going to come out harder and stronger. It's a bit like a bottle of pop. It's going to fizz, and then it's going to explode. Yeah. So all that suppression can start to lead to people being physically ill. And there is a correlation. So Laurie Santos talks about a correlation between good health and happiness. Yeah. If I feel content, I am more likely to have good health. Just as an aside, and while Mark Brackett's on the screen, he does talk about there are, you know, we're talking about can we bring these other emotions to work? He talks about there may be a couple of professions where that's not appropriate. So, for example, if you were to see your doctor, you don't really want your doctor to start off by saying, I'm having a really bad day, and how are you? That's not going to be the kind of way forward. So sometimes, is this about regulating our emotions as well? If you look at the work of Eric Byrne, and he talks in his transactional analysis, he talks about this idea of free child. And I love free child because I think at heart I'm a free child. Free child is just expressing their emotions as they are. We're on a 2-story office, and quite often they talk about they can hear me when I'm down here upstairs. So I've obviously got that very emotive idea. But we need to think about our emotions as a visitor, actually. So if you think about, so Adam Grant suggests that instead of saying I am angry, we talk about I am holding anger. And it is a momentary thing. It's not something that is staying for good. So thinking about this kind of idea, and if you've come across the work of Matt Haig, I think this is just a really nice, phrase to think about. You don't have to be positive, but also you don't have to feel guilty about fear, sadness, and anger. They're all emotions, and they are all equally valid. And usually if we feel emotion and those other emotions, they're kind of telling us something about ourselves. There's usually something going on. So I've referenced a couple of songs already. So for this one, I thought I'd reference a bit of Harry Styles. For some reason, this sometimes accompanies me at 2 o'clock in the morning when I can't get to sleep. So treat people with kindness. And this is some work that's been done, some research that's been done by the Harvard Business Review. So actually when you give somebody a compliment or words of recognition and kind of feel that, think about what does that feel like for you? It helps them feel more fulfilled. It helps boost their self-esteem. It improves how they feel about themselves. So in terms of their self-evaluations, and you get positive emotions. The result is happier, more engaged employees. And quite often, we talk about performance management is a really good term in this phrase, but performance management is quite often associated with somebody doing badly, but it can equally be performance management to help somebody get, to kind of get their next role. So it doesn't mean they're performing badly, but it's to help them kind of go up that. There's also a TED talk, which I've referenced in the resources for you by Ted. Sorry, not by Ted. It's because that's a TED talk. It's by Chris Turner, and he did note some work that was done in a healthcare setting where teams were put into a patient simulator and were rated from giving fantastic care to what was called catastrophic care. And what they noted was that there was a big variance in teams, and what was responsible for the big variance of teams was incivility or rudeness. And that meant that people were not able to care as much as perhaps they would have done, which is quite an interesting thought, in what leads that. And there's a lot of work actually being done at the moment in terms of what does incivility bring to the workplace. And there was some research that came out just after the pandemic that said people didn't really know how to behave anymore back in the workplace because we'd all got used to being at home on our kitchen tables or wherever we were working. And then suddenly there was all these people again, and we weren't necessarily sure what to do with that. So we've kind of talked about the happiness. We've talked about treating people with kindness. I think emotional intelligence, that's a good question, Mandeep. Thank you. So I think emotional intelligence is a key skill. And I think it's really interesting to see it become increasingly more important as a management skill. So I think we've been talking about those technical skills a long time about being a manager and the things you should do. But actually that emotional intelligence will take you quite a long way because fundamentally, if you are leading people, it's about managing people. So you need that being able to pick up on when perhaps somebody isn't themselves, or reading when you've got it wrong and being able to make yourself vulnerable. All those things are incredibly important. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I decided not to touch on emotional intelligence, but it has been in the back of my mind all the time when I've been thinking about this. It's a great question. So let's have a think about what does it mean to be authentic at work. So I've already referenced that, my authentic self at work might not necessarily be dancing on tables, shouting and screaming. But what do you think it means to be authentic at work? So we've got another little Menti for you to have a go at so I can drink my tea, because as you know, that's the drill. What do you think it means to be authentic at work? See, I drink my tea and Joe drinks her water. Genuine, Mandy? Yeah. Being honest. Honest is one of our core values, actually. It's at Strategi. Yeah. Being myself. Okay. Being real. The freedom to challenge and speak up. Wearing your hair naturally. Yeah, that's a good shout. Being able to establish relationships. Being approachable. Being clear and explicit. I like being clear. Oh, Diane, be yourself with the confines of expected social and professional norms, which they do vary from company to company. Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things about me is I've done a lot of interim work before I arrived at Strategi, and I think it would be fair to say that I'm not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. That's probably a way to describe it politely. Yeah. Caroline, showing vulnerability, that's a good shout. So that's, the work of Brené Brown talks about that, being vulnerable. If we could just go back to the Menti, be yourself with T and C. What does that mean? Can someone explain that for me? Be yourself with T and C. Terms and conditions, thank you very much. Okay, that's lovely. Being trusted, being able to establish relations, high performing, uniquely me. Oh, uniquely me. Yes, I do spend a lot of my life talking about inclusion, and that really is about celebrating the uniqueness of everybody, being trusted, being myself. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Finding a workplace where you can be authentically you is incredibly important, and that might take some time. That's the first thing I would say. Susan Cain, she talks in a manifest for introverts, that staying true to your temperament is the key to finding work you love and work that matters. So you need to find something that is congruent. Let's use that as a word. Congruent between you and the organization you work for. And if we think, go back to Mark Brackett, and I would suggest you go on Mark Brackett's website, mainly because he has this great chart which has all the emotions on, and he has a great expression which is name them to tame them. So if you want to kind of come to terms with your emotions, you have to be really specific. You don't just say, I'm unhappy, I am sad, I am feeling apathy, whatever it is he talks about. But Mark Brackett talks about, the honesty and authenticity are often bandied about, but they don't always sit with the happiness mantra. And does that work kind of for everybody? Yeah, the role and company fit and serve you. I think you need to be able to trust leaders. You do need to be able to trust your leader. And I said earlier, the relationship you have with your manager is probably one of the most important relationships that you have at work. So I think this probably leads us back to a place we've already been to today, psychological safety, and just thinking about those 4 stages. And, just when I'm talking about this, really think about where are you in this terms of psychological safety? So do you feel included, which is stage 1? So do you feel accepted for who you are? And that can be, it can be about your hair. It can be about the way you do your work. So, for example, I really struggle with the kind of 9 to 5 carry on. So I can quite often be found doing things around that. Do I feel safe to learn? Do I feel safe to ask questions, give and receive feedback? Do I feel safe to make mistakes and it's okay? And there's a lot of work actually being done in that area. Amy Edmondson just has a new book around that at the moment. I feel like I've just given Amy Edmondson a lot of airtime. I should probably get a fee for that, I feel. Yeah. Do I feel safe to contribute? Am I making a difference? This is about that thing about meaningful work. And then we get the safe to challenge, am I safe to challenge the status quo? There is respect and disagreement and dissent when something needs to change. And that's okay. It doesn't become a big thing. These really lends itself to authenticity. Do I feel safe to do all those things? My favorite example of a company that probably wasn't safe to challenge is the Kinder Egg example, where they managed to produce a Kinder Egg that said KKK and then release that to the US market. I think that's quite an interesting strategy of a way to go. I'm pretty sure that somebody along the way said, I don't think you should do that, or at least thought it, and nobody felt psychologically safe to do that. So being authentic at work kind of lends itself to what does it mean for me and how do I feel about that? And do I bring my whole self to work? Because that's another expression that's used here quite a lot. Bringing my whole self to work. Okay. So if you listen to the CIPD Work What If podcast, there is one called What If Everybody Brought Their True Self to Work? And they kind of had a few thoughts around this, and they talked about be yourself more with skill. And I think what they were getting at here was be intentional in the way you position yourself. And we might be kind of going down a little bit the politics route. You know, what's my politics? What is politic for me to be at work? Just conform enough. So I think, you know, in the chat, you were kind of talking about, you know, it depends on the company you work with and what is the right fit for that company. As somebody who's done a lot of interim work, I can certainly think of times when I've kind of probably dialed down bits of my personality. Luckily at Strategi, they let me dial it right the way up. I don't know whether that's a good thing for everyone else or not. And you know, one of the things they talked about is it unrealistic to have one real self? You know, is it unrealistic to have this one real self at work? And perhaps there is a work self, which is the way you're conforming enough. There is your home self. I'm pretty sure I know I don't. I'm not going to go home this evening and say to my husband, right, I'm just going to get the laptop out. Let me just run through this presentation I've done with you today about happiness at work. I'm not quite sure how he would respond to that as well. But he also talks about where is the third space. And that third space was where you can truly be yourself. I think that's important. So, you know, think about that congruence. What are the things that kind of sit together with that? And I think we all do this to a certain extent. So, you know, I think we kind of modify bits of ourselves. I think what you have to be able to do, and Claire, yes, it is masking. I think you have to feel comfortable with it. I think there's probably, Claire and everyone else, layers of masking. So I think if you are kind of modifying little bits, I think that you can probably feel comfortable with that. I think it's when you get that whole dampening down of a big aspect of your personality, whatever that is, where that becomes more problematic. Okay, so we've been talking about happiness and pursue it. So a question for you to think about in the chat. What do you think the impact of a constant pursuit of happiness is? What's the outcome of that? If you're constantly going after happiness, going after that one big moment in life, what do you think the constant? What happens? Disappointment, burnout, possibly losing focus. You're never actually happy. Yeah. I do wonder if you and Salma, yeah, you become unhappy. I do wonder if you don't get to that moment, if it's just there's always a something. Yeah, Pearly, you've read my mind beautifully there. You miss the now. You know, you miss those little moments in the day which make you happy. Perhaps you become too self-centered. It's a tough one. Is it the fact that, you know, we are constantly chasing happiness that perhaps makes us unhappy? Anyway. That's quite a profound thought, isn't it? What day is it? Wednesday? There we go. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do, Mandeep. You have to drive purpose, but you have to be realistic and know that direction can change. And that's okay. I think you have to be comfortable with that. You know, one thing there is a lot of chat about now is the adaptability quotient. So do I feel that I can adapt? Can I live with you with a little bit of ambiguity? Yeah, because actually the world is quite ambiguous. I think that's the nature of it. Yeah, you do have to celebrate things along the way, Claire. If I wait for Manchester United to win another Champions League, that is going to be a long time. So I have to celebrate the bits as we're going along. Hence, I'm celebrating last night. Yeah, it's a good shout. I think when we're talking about this question, we're very much thinking about perfectionism. And perfectionism does tend to kind of sit with happiness quite a bit. And there's a couple of TED Talks, again, that I've referenced in the resources for you. The one's by Thomas Curran, and he describes perfectionism as everybody's favourite flaw. That classic interview question is, what are your weaknesses? Yeah. And I don't know, I've definitely said it. So I'm just going to hold my hands up now. I've just said, I'm a perfectionist. Yeah. Anybody who's on this call who's worked with me is going, yeah, she is. She's a nightmare. But yeah, it's everybody's favorite flaw. Everybody likes to own up to that. But if you think about it, if you are striving for that all the time, and I remember a manager I used to work with, he would said to me, Helen, sometimes good is good enough. And I think that's a good shout. I love the idea of celebrating along the way. And just one other TED talk that I've kind of referenced is Iskra Lawrence's, and she talks about social media. And I do wonder if I was doing this talk, maybe 20 years ago, and we didn't have social media, would we be talking about this in a slightly different way? Because I think the impact of social media is interesting. I'm pretty sure that when I post on social media, I post my best self. Yeah, I don't definitely post the days when I'm tearing my hair out. I do think there is more of that happening now, but I definitely post my best self. And if you wanted to go and check me out on LinkedIn, you will now know that it was a year this week that I started at Strategi, because I made a whole thing about it. But that's me living my best life almost. It's probably not my real self. Yeah. But Iskra Lawrence, she describes social media as a weapon of mass destruction to our self-esteem. And I think that's quite a powerful statement, because what she's talking about there is, there's all these images of everybody living these amazing lives and this aspiration that we always want to get to. And do we ever get there? So I think we should go with Claire, and I think we should get those T-shirts made and, celebrate things along the way and make sure we do that. One of the things that can be really helpful is having a gratitude log, and at the end of every day, just writing down 3 things today that you are grateful for. And if you're going to do a gratitude log, can I just recommend that you do something else? You ask yourself another question as well, and that is, what am I looking forward to tomorrow as well? And I take no credit for that. It's my friend Sarah who gave me that top tip, but I think it's a really good shout, not only to reflect back, but to reflect forward. What am I looking forward to tomorrow? So I thought I couldn't do a sort of talk on happiness without giving you some happiness top tips. And here are some to think about. So you've got the gratitude log. Practice radical self-care. So radical self-care. There are a lot of people pleasers out there. And again, I'm going to hold my hand up. I'm a people pleaser. But it's really thinking about that, saying no. Think about the relationship. So one of the ones you've got a bit later on is about making nutritious connections. What are the ones that really work for you? And I think we all, from time to time, find ourselves in slightly toxic relationships with other people, and how that's come about. And, there's a variety of reasons why that happens. But really think about your connections. Are they nutritious? Are they two-way? Are they kind of work for you? The second thing I've got on this slide is a bit radical. Do your job. Yeah. And what I really meant by this was, yes, you should do your job. But make sure that you do it consistently. Make sure that you have everything you need to do your job. And if you don't, shout up. Because I think so many times at work, what happens is that people don't say anything. And I've certainly known people who've left businesses because they felt that they weren't included or something was happening, and they never said a word. And actually that probably could have been resolved. So, speak up. Recognize and acknowledge people, and the little things, work really well. These don't have to be massive intentions, but so Sam, I think he was on the call, helped me yesterday getting ready for a Teams call, which was fantastic to call the stress out of it. So there you go, Sam. I've just recognized you as well. So recognizing and acknowledge people is really helpful. And remember the kindness thing, that really helps people's well-being. Be conscientious with feedback. So do it regularly, do it often, and remember to do the positive stuff as well as what I would call developmental, because I'm tragically avoiding constructive criticism. I've even blanked it from my mind. Look for the glimmers in everyday life, the micro moments of happiness that will make you happy. What are the little things that are going to make a difference to you? I was happy this morning because I got too late to clean the bathroom. You see that as a win for me. I'm happy about that. And then use the 5 choices. So there is a book called The 5 Choices of Extraordinary Productivity. Again, I've referenced it for you in the resources. And these are sleep, eat, move, relax, and connect. So getting enough sleep is getting a lot of chat at the moment. It's continued to get a lot of chat. Eating the right things, relaxing, do what works for you when it comes to relaxing, and connecting. Yeah, and I would definitely recommend the last chapter of that book, really to kind of build on that for you. And I kind of thought that probably I should come to some conclusion. This is my work photo. This is the photo they like to share of me at Strategi. I don't constantly look like this. I just want to stress that. Obviously you can see it. So do I think happiness at work is overrated? Well, I'm going to put my sort of stake in the ground, if you like, and say that actually I don't think happiness at work are overrated. I think you spend a lot of time at work, and if you're not happy and you're not enjoying your job, that is a long time. What I do think, and I think somebody's already alluded to this in the chat, so you've kind of stolen my thunder, but on this occasion I'm going to let you off, is that we need to make room for all the other emotions as well. And we need to be able to have those discussions when people are feeling sad, angry. And I've kind of gone for the 2 extremes. I appreciate that. But we need to be able to have those discussions and have those equally as comfortably as we do when you are having those happy conversations. So that's really my position. So just to share a couple of things. So in terms of further resources, this is all the things that I've kind of looked at. Lisa, I think you're asking about where you can do the science of wellbeing for nothing. It's on the 4th one down, the Coursera. You can do that. Definitely recommend the Thomas Curran TED Talk and the World Happiness Report. If you want to know why the UK is only 20th, that's definitely for you. And just to finish off, if you've liked what you've seen here, so some of the other things that we kind of do at Strategi, and I spend a lot of time talking about leadership development, is we have a leadership academy which starts again in January 2024, 6 workshops, and if you were to come back to me and say you attended this session, we will give you a £50 discount for somebody attending. So it'd normally be £600, it'd be £550. And I have to say it's loads of fun, and this is people having fun at that particular workshop. There's a lot of props involved. Yeah. Can I just say I deliberately didn't wear that top today because I've noticed recently that's my go-to training top. So I'm trying really hard not to wear it anymore. And that's me done. Any questions, any thoughts, any observations? That's quite a lot to think about all in one go, isn't it? Oh. No, thank you for coming. I think there's a good thought about, I was just saying to Joe actually, that this was definitely a food for thought session. The last session I did was about managing neurodiversity. No, thanks, Rachel. Lovely to see you. But this is more of a food for thought. The last session was managing neurodiversity, and I think that there's definitely some hints and tips I can give you there. This is more, I think, of a thought-provoking session, and I just want to say thank you for coming and listening and taking part.
Thanks very much, Helen. I think everyone will agree it was a really good interactive event, and there was some really good comments and suggestions there. The next event that we've got is on Thursday the 5th, and is called Handling Grievances for Effective Outcomes. I will be sending an email out this afternoon to everyone, so a link to sign up for that one will be included in the email. If anybody wants a copy of the handout, obviously your resources are on there as well, or a copy of the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post that I'm going to do this afternoon. We will send out a quick feedback survey to everyone that's signed up, so if you've got a couple of minutes to complete it, then this would be really appreciated. If anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit and exec recruit within the group. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thanks very much for your time in putting it together, Helen, and thanks very much to everybody for tuning in.